Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Passionately Wrong podcast. Randy and I today are going to discuss with you a topic that comes up quite a lot, comes up at different times in people's lives and their careers, and it is to what extent they can and should seek work-life balance. Supposedly, it's one of the holy grails of a person whose life is going well, that they somehow have found magical balance between all the things that are important to them, their work life, their family life, other important interests. I think what Randy and I want to explore a little bit with you today is whether this is a myth that deserves to be busted, whether in fact it is one of the things people are passionately wrong about, that indeed seeking work-life balance can be counterproductive to your progress in life and make you sad and frustrated when you don't achieve it. So that's the topic we want to discuss. And maybe I'll kick it off by suggesting a way to look at it in this way, Randy. If I look back on my career, both my work career and important things that happened to me in my private life, I have to say the times that I made the most progress were when I committed to being ridiculously imbalanced. So I had to pursue something with intensity, and I did, putting aside interests of health or family or what have you in pursuit of an important work goal, or to train for a marathon, I might have to spend significant hours training more than I would have otherwise. And so this was a deliberate pursuit of imbalance, knowing that it had an end, and then knowing that it was going to bring me something important. So that's the setup. Sometimes it's not possible. And in fact, I would argue most of the time, it's not possible to achieve work-life balance. And so what? Maybe that's okay. What do you think?
So, from the military standpoint, which is I only have two standpoints, military and my post-military editing, freelance, stay at home, work from home standpoint. But the military has been trying to figure this out for a long time because they have such a high divorce rate because of the huge imbalance on work life. They've tried a number of things. Ideally, if you come in to the military and you're single, which not everyone is, but the majority of people are, that's when you're going 100 miles an hour. You're getting all these like really tough schools that like Ranger schools, 10 weeks long, and you don't even get to use your phone. So you're not communicating with anybody during that time. The Green Beret course also has periods of months where you're not communicating outside the field. You're doing field work and you have to focus on that. And there's a lot of other courses like that as well. Most courses are not usually longer than a month. And a lot of them you can communicate outside by phone or something like that. But especially in the Green Berets and during the war on terror for the last 20 years in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, there was 9 month. In the beginning, the internet wasn't as developed. There were no smartphones. There wasn't Zoom. There wasn't WhatsApp. So in 2001, 2000 to 2005, say, you didn't communicate home except on a satellite phone, which God knows how much that cost. In fact, no one knew how much it cost. You had one for the 10 of you and you were afraid to overuse it. So you're like, everyone can talk for 15 minutes once a week. But for all we knew, the government owned the satellite and the whole thing was free and we could have talked as much as we wanted. We just didn't know. People were just making random rules and we had no idea. But back to the question of is it not the best goal? I think that depends on your goal, right? You have to analyze all this when you go in. West Point, for example, you're not allowed to attend West Point if you're married. If you get married, if you decide out of high school to marry your high school sweetheart, or halfway through 2 years of West Point, you want to marry your high school sweetheart, you no longer attend West Point. And there's a reason for that. They want you to focus on everything they got going on there. And the military, and especially in the special ops world, you have the generals, the high general of Special Operations Command and his advisors have been trying to figure out the balance of deployments. Like for a while, it was like 2/3 of the year you will stay home and 1/3 of the year you will be gone. That's the max. And you can't be gone more than 1/3 of the year. But it got so you could manipulate that so much that they had to define it. Are you talking about deployment? Are you talking about what if the guy goes to Ranger school? That's 2 months. So does that mean he can only be gone 2 months on a deployment on a 4-month deployment because he was already gone for Ranger school for 2 months? And so they had to figure that. And eventually they came up with this rule that no one could do, which was like head on the pillow. If your head's not on the pillow in your home, if you go out in the field for a week to practice walking through the woods, well, you were gone for 7 days. So it was just actually I think it was reverse. I think it was 8 months out and 4 months back or something like that. I can't remember anymore. But it was something that no one could agree on. No one could really track. I had this really intricate mate Excel spreadsheet that had all these formulas in it where when you were gone, what kind was it? Was it out of the country? Was it across the states? Was it in the same state? Were you able to make a phone call? And then, because they would change the rules on us every year and no one could ever figure it out. And then we couldn't fight a war anymore because you could only be there for 4 months and everyone had to switch out and we were trying to figure it out. So I think the answer to your question is it depends on your goal, and you really need to think about that goal and your partner, if you have a partner, needs to agree to the goal. I've had couples in the military where the wife said, I didn't marry you to be alone. I quit. I want a divorce. And that was the reason they got divorced. So obviously, if you have a partner in this life, there has to be some kind of meet in the middle.
So you covered a lot of really good topics there that I'd like to highlight, Randy. One is, and it's a high level topic that it's important to distinguish. You talked about the military's needs and what happens if you want to go to West Point or if you want to join one of these special forces programs. The military, obviously, the organization, let's say, has an interest in achieving a certain outcome, which is people not burning out and not being happy and quitting the organization, which is obviously related to the individual's perspective, but it's different, right? That your company will always, and your organization want to push you right up to the edge of burnout in the interest of getting the maximum performance out of you. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it's in their interest to optimize and get every little erg of performance out of you they can. Your goal is the right place to start with this because we're talking to individuals now from an individual perspective, I presume, not necessarily as people running companies or running the military, although I suppose that's an interesting angle. But if we look at the individual's goal, it is the right place to start, I would agree, because people will have different goals in mind. Some people probably do want to have, I don't mean this in a condescending way, an easy life, a life without significant peaks and valleys where they can just work a normal job, have normal experiences, devote a sufficient time to their vacations and their hobbies. And that's okay. And I think for that kind of an approach to life, one is most likely to be able to achieve something approximating work-life balance. You're not going super high. You're not going super low. It's just steady state. Okay, fine. That wasn't my perspective when I raised this topic, and it's good to call it out. One of my bullet point notes for this topic was letting yourself become unbalanced in pursuit of ambitious goals increases the odds that you will achieve them. So I admit I am assuming that if you want to do great things, becoming unbalanced or imbalanced in the pursuit of those things increases your likelihood. So yeah, if you're going to become a special forces soldier, if you're going to make it through West Point, then you are not pursuing an easy life. You simply aren't. And let's acknowledge it right here. If you want to become a law firm partner or a senior executive in a company, you are not pursuing an easy life. And therefore, it's probably healthy and necessary and mature for you to recognize going into it. My goal is incompatible with work-life balance, at least to a large extent. And so, yes, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So it's funny because that's exactly right. When I was in college, there was a guy that was a year ahead of me that was in ROTC when I didn't even know what ROTC or the military was. And then after my first year of college, I went to the recruiter and I went into the Army. And then he had to finish college and maybe he went straight in the military or maybe he got his master's and then went in the military. I don't know what his path was. Eventually, I was a Green Beret. And so I met him again. I left the college in 88, joined the Army in 87. I joined the Army in 87. And then somewhere like mid 90s, I am on the base where the Green Beret course is conducted, doing some training. And I'm using the same bathroom as the trainees. And I'm like taking a whiz. And the guy who's taking a whiz next to me and looks at me, he's like, hey, are you Randy Searles? I was like, yes, I am. And you remember me? I was like, no, so he's an officer. No, he didn't have any rank because he was a trainee because he was in the course. And so I was like, no, I don't have a clue who you are. It's like, I'm so-and-so. I was like, oh, hey, I remember you. How you doing? I thought you were an RTC, you an officer now. I was like, yeah. He's like, how's it going? Are you going to the course? Cause I knew he was going to the course because he had the little things on it. He had little cloth numbers and stuff. He's like, how do you liking the course? I'm thinking about dropping out. I was like, it's not for everybody. Why are you thinking about dropping out? He's like, I always this is what I wanted to do. When I was in RTC, I wanted to be a ranger. I wanted to be a Green Beret. This is what I wanted to do the whole time I was in there. But I'm married now and this is my dream. But I realized that I'm going to be gone so much as a Green Beret that maybe that's not the work balance I want, which is funny. I think this is in the late 90s, which is funny because 3 years later, 9/11, everyone was gone for 9 months at a time. So he probably did that anyway, and he wasn't a Green Beret. But that's the decision. Everyone who goes in the Green Berets knows you're going to be gone 6 months out of the year. That 6 months is not as tough as it used to be because of communications and smartphones and video calls and stuff. Back then, you didn't hear from someone for 6 or 9 months because they're in some small town in the middle of Colombia and that didn't have long distance phone call, didn't have coconuts. But anyway, that's just a really like kind of an example of someone who made a choice who along the way, he had different goals initially. He got married, he had a partner, and he realized halfway through trying to attain his goal, that wasn't his goal anymore.
Yeah, I might have told you this story before, but something that stuck with me from early in my career was when I was working at an associate at one of the law firms where the hours were quite ridiculous. 100-hour weeks, 14 hours a day, every day, no time off ever. One of the partners, so usually you do that for 6, 7, 8 years, and then you become partner if you're going to become partner, or you leave the firm. And so the partners, you would think, having gone through that gauntlet, are going to have a better life, right? That's the whole point of moving up, is that you got people underneath you to do the scut work. And to a certain extent, that's true. But the partners also themselves had a lot of stress and work a lot of hours, to the point where I observed them unable to plan for vacations. And even if they had planned a vacation, something would come up, some crisis, and they had to let their families go on vacation without them. And I thought, boy, this is not good. The ones that aren't divorced don't ever see their families. And then one of the partners had a heart attack and died while working. And we had a little memorial, and the partner's wife came in and she spoke to the firm, and her words they left an impression on me. She said, with my husband X, it was always the firm first, firm number one, and then me, then family, then everything else. And you could tell she was bitter and she resented it. And they were one of the ones that actually were still together. I think some of the spouses stayed with their partners because they got good benefits. They could take vacations at expensive places and spend all the money that the partner was earning that they could not spend themselves. But to me, I thought, okay, this is balance gone awry, in the sense that if you do anything for too long without a break, it becomes intolerable. It doesn't matter if it's great. It doesn't matter if it's really intense and you enjoy it. It doesn't matter if it's super boring. If you do anything too long without a break, it becomes, intolerable. And therefore, for me, I could see the benefit of hard and intense work, but only if it's punctuated by something different. So that's why people like vacations, right? It's a break from their normal job, and it re-energizes them to that downtime, even of a couple of weeks, re-energizes them to go back and do it. But I guess the point we'll get into that in a moment. The point I wanted to make there was, yes, I see the impact of long periods of imbalance on your ability to have a relationship, to have a family, to have partners. It's probably one of the reasons that, I don't know how it is in the military, but lawyers are more likely to marry lawyers. Doctors are more likely to marry doctors. They understand the schedule of what it is you're going through. Someone who doesn't know what it's like to work in a law firm has no concept of why you need to spend 14 hours reviewing the same stupid prospectus. Why can't it wait until tomorrow? What's the pressure? And same thing, I suppose, in other jobs.
I think in the military, the women in the military are more likely to marry military because they need someone that's going to understand them. Because one of the things, obvious, once I say it, you're going to say that's obvious. It's whatever, 9-1 or more men to women. So you'll have one woman in a 30-man squad, or maybe 3 women in a 30-man squad. So it's the biggest imbalance of women to men in pretty much any profession, like nursing. You got 2 men to every 10 women probably in nursing. So it's the reverse balance. But if you have that job you really have to trust your partner because you're gonna see the jealousy. The men don't. My experience talking to the military women is that the women they date outside the military don't understand. So where are you going? You're going to Afghanistan. Where are you going to stay? In a tent with all these men? Maybe. I don't think I want that to happen. I was like, it's not up to you. Initially, and depending on where you went, you would. There's only one place to sleep. Everyone sleeps there. And so, and you'll share showers and stuff like that. But it takes a really strong man to go, okay, it's a military. I get it. And usually it's another military guy that understands it. Now, on the other side, there's only so many women in the military you can marry. So the men are looking for women outside the military. You don't see too many military couples. Sometimes you do, though. It's also hard with the rank because if one gets promoted, if officers enlisted aren't supposed to date, and yet sometimes they end up married. And then you can't say they can't be married, but they weren't supposed to date in the first place. So it's a weird kind of conundrum.
No, and what you're describing, simply the imbalance in numbers between men and women is going to be one of the factors that contributes to a higher likelihood of relationships failing. Exactly because the non-military spouse cannot understand all of what it's like that the spouse is facing. That's difficult, right? Because you can't fix that by restructuring the job, or you can only partially fix it. It's just never going to work, right? Your job involves things that are inherently detrimental to a relationship. Interesting.
If you think about the women now just coming into the Green Berets, of which, as far as I know, only 3 or 4 women have passed the Green Beret course. So you're going to be assigned to a Green Beret company of 100 men, and you're going to be the only woman. And that's just the truth of it. So you gotta, if you're in a relationship outside of that, you're going to have to figure that out with your partner.
That goes to a broader topic that I see come up over and over again, which is that people are, if they think about it, usually able to identify goals that are important to them. So they won't do it by default until you prompt them with a question, hey, what's important to you and why? One will say, oh, I want to make a lot of money, or I want to be famous, or whatever. I want to be an astronaut. And then there's a second step that's pretty important, which is, do you understand what it's going to take for you to get there? And that is a question of both costs and opportunities. You're going to have to spend time on it. It might cost you money. It's going to prevent you from doing other things. And to be fair, it's very difficult to get a clear understanding of that if you don't have experience or someone to talk to who could tell you about it, and someone who's maybe got the right motives to tell you the good and the bad. And then there's the human tendency to focus on the upside but ignore the downside. There's all sorts of reasons why, even if you have correctly identified your goals and motivations, that you underestimate the costs. But there's a third problem, which is that if you have accurate understanding of what the costs are going to be, there's a lot of people who are then unwilling to pay the cost. They still want to be rich, but they don't want to have to save money and invest over 30 years to get there. Okay. That's the land of wishful thinking, which I think people spend a lot of time in. And to watch something and not to be willing to pay the price to get it, for me, is a sign of immaturity, right? That's what a child does. They say, I want the ice cream, I want the candy bar, give it to me. And okay. I think the work-life balance falls a little bit into that category, in the sense that for one of the 3 reasons we just identified, they either don't know what it is they're really looking for, so it's foolish to talk about it. They do know what they're willing to look for, but they don't know the cost of getting it, or they know those 2 things, but they aren't willing to pay the cost to get it. Okay. If you're going to be serious and mature about your approach to what you want in life, you've got to go through all 3 stages. What do I want? What is it going to cost? Am I willing to pay it? And there's a way maybe to be smart about it. You could say, can I achieve what I want with less cost or a different cost? Or if I go on a slightly angled route or a slower route, maybe I can spread out the costs over a period of time. That's a wholly different discussion then of saying, can I get what I want in a way that works with my values? But until you start having that sort of even describing it to you, it sounds hard, right? Doesn't it? You really got to think this thing through. And I wonder how often that actually happens, that people are so deliberate about their choices. I don't think I was when I was younger. That doesn't sound to me like you knew what was going to be the cost of everything that you pursued when you were younger. Is it realistic, if we're talking to a generation or 2 behind us, that we tell them, hey, spend a little bit of time doing these things and listening to podcasts like ours to help you work through these problems?
I think that the newer generations, younger generations, let's call them, I think we were a little bit better about this is the cost. I'm willing to pay for it. And they're like, this is the cost. It's too much. We should change that. I feel a lot of that around me from the younger generations.
And you know what? I can't even criticize that impulse, which is to say the system seems difficult. Let's change the system. Whereas for sure, let's talk about what you're more likely to be successful with, what's within your control, what's outside your control, the basic Stoic approach that I talk about and write about. For sure, the Stoics would say focus on what's within your control. And by the way, that's what you think and do, not what is external to you, like the system. And we restructure society to suit our needs. Not that you shouldn't have ideals, but I would have a healthy dose of focus on self-reliance and what it is you can control. And what you can control, Randy, is of course what you want, how you feel about what happens to you and what you pursue. So yeah, I don't know if that's a generational thing, but I would say, yeah, it does seem like there is a difference at the moment between people who are willing to just put in the effort and people who wish to put in less effort. That might be grossly unfair, right? Because I know plenty of people in younger generations who work really hard and say, I'm working really hard, but I'm not getting what I want. Therefore, even if I did everything that I was supposed to do, I'm still not getting the outcome I want. I can't find a partner. I don't find a job that pays me well. So I think we shouldn't be too quick to just say that if they did everything we did, I think the outcome would be the same as we had. Perhaps the system has changed a little bit in the meantime. I'd be open to that argument anyway.
Yeah. I think the other thing you touched on it is if you feel, if you know what you want and you're willing to do it, or and you know what it takes, and you're like, we should change that. I think there's another piece of assessment. What are you giving up if you change that to make it easier, for instance? Because are you coming out with the same type of law students? Are you coming out with the same kind of doctors that we had 20 years? Are you coming out with the same kind of Green Berets we had 20 years ago? And I don't know if the younger generations look at it that way. They're looking at like maybe checking the box and like, hey, maybe I'm not as smart as a doctor as the one 20 years ago or something like that. I don't know. Or maybe I
Yeah.
feel like,
No insight. Wrote an article a while back on what's happening with college degrees and the number of people who are told in the US, at least, that they need to go to college to have good earnings prospects. And over the course of the last 20 years, since you and I first went to college, the number of people going from high school to college has almost doubled from 30%. It has actually more than doubled from 30%, say 40% up to about 70% of high schoolers now start college, but it's still only 40% of students who ultimately finish and get a degree within 6 years. So I think that one of the interesting things as a consequence of people realizing that having a college degree increases your lifetime's earnings is two things. One, more people are going to college who shouldn't go to college. And two, observing that, people say, hey, the system is broken. This isn't working. One obvious response is, oh, let's just give everybody a college degree. I think that's a natural, likely outcome. Randy, you'll learn more if you have a college degree, so here's a college degree. Ignoring all of the reasons why that happens. It's not a college degree as such that makes you earn more. It's the process you went through to get it. If I just put a ranger tab on your uniform, that doesn't mean you can do all the things I want a ranger to do, right? The answer is
Starbelly Sneech.
right again.
Starbellied Sneech.
Yes, exactly. You can't just make everybody that's the kind of system change that I would say is likely to be ineffectual. And yeah, there is something to be said for taking control of the things that you can take control of. And in my view, when it comes to this topic of work-life balance, it's anyway a little bit fanciful to think that there is a steady state that you can achieve. When in your life has there ever been a time where there wasn't something going on? There's always something going on. Inflation is up, inflation is down. Employment is up, employment is down. The weather is hot, the weather is cold. There's movement, there's change, there's flux, in other words. And I get it, by the way. I very much get the fantasy that you can somehow freeze things and preserve them and say, okay, there shall be no further change from this. The number of people in my town is perfect. No more people shall come in and out. The number of citizens in our country is perfect. We won't let any immigrants in or let anybody die. That's, I get it. Change is disruptive. Change is hard. And the impulse to say, let's not change anything and just preserve the status quo is strong. But life doesn't work that way. So you can either fight against the natural shifts of life where things are improving or worsening, but they're always changing. Or I think, and my recommendation to listeners is accept and embrace wholeheartedly. Don't fight it. Accept that life is difficult and is going to have ups and downs. And then I hate the phrase lean into, but yeah, amplify those changes in a way that serves to your advantage. Specifically, accept that through intense periods of difficult activity, you can achieve a much bigger outcome than you might by slow, steady, boring, balanced effort. I'll give you a specific example, Randy. When I started working, I didn't pay attention to my health at all. I never was very active and I got fat and out of shape until one day in my early 30s. I was like, oh, this is terrible. My life is going down a path that I don't like where I'm going to end up if I keep on this path. And so I resolved to lose some weight. And dieting is difficult and painful, at least for me. And I think it is for many people. I didn't want to do it for long because I knew it would suck. So I dieted like a crazy person. In 6 weeks, I lost 50 pounds. And I did that by drastically reducing my calorie intake and upping my calorie expenditure. And then after I hit a target of, okay, the first 50 pounds were gone, I switched to something that was much more balanced, which was just healthier eating and a regular exercise for the next 20 years. So intense period of imbalance with a specific goal in mind. I got to lose some weight quick, which normally I wouldn't recommend to anybody, right? Don't let yourself get fat in the first place. Pay attention to your weight. But there I was in a situation of imbalance. What was I going to do about it? And that's an example of what I mean when I say embrace targeted imbalance to bring you a specific benefit. You're not going to become a ranger unless you can go through the, what did you say, 10-week ranger school. You just aren't. And so if that's a choice you need to make and it's something you can say, I know this is going to suck, but at the end, I'm going to be a ranger and you can never take that away from me.
I see exactly what you're saying. And I think that's something that can be coordinated with your partner, your family, whatever else is going on that you're balanced with. You're like, hey, I want to and need to go to ranger school for a promotion. It's going to be 10 weeks of hell for me. And you're going to have to take care of the kids for those 10 weeks. And I'm not going to be able to talk to any of you guys. A, when's the best time to do this? B, what do you need? What do we need to put in place to give you help while I'm gone to make yes, I have to do I'm going to do the exertion and the work, but obviously I need to put things in place because I was a part of this system that was working with the kids getting to school and the kids doing homework, and how are we going to mitigate that? Right. So I think that works for everything. Hey, I went to the doctor, labs are bad, my weight's bad, my cholesterol's bad, my blood pressure's bad. The only way we're going to get through this is diet and exercise. So I'm going to have to get up earlier and work out, and therefore I'm not going to be here to take the kids to school or whatever. Or I'm going to have to go in the afternoon after work, so I'm going to be gone an extra 2 hours every day, or whatever works for the family. And then make sure that we're integrating these ideas so that you don't have the work-life balance, but it's not as disruptive as it could be if you just said, this is what I'm going to do, and we're not going to mitigate any of these problems.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate and like your highlighting the importance of seeing that your actions have impact on those around you, whether it's your friends, your family, especially your family is of course affected, but everyone's affected when you go through one of these intense periods of imbalance, and whether you do it on purpose or whether it just happens to you. And key success factor to staying in your relationship, not ruining relationships with your friends, is talking about it with them. I went through a 15-year period at least where, you know this, having been on the receiving end of it, I didn't talk to a single friend from school or from any of the places where I had met people and become friends with, because I threw myself wholeheartedly into work. And the little free time I had, I devoted then to my other two priorities, which was family and health. Friends for me came after it, and I didn't pay enough attention to it, to the point where when I finally did get on Facebook and LinkedIn, I was like, oh, hi, everybody. And then life moved on for many of them, and that's totally okay. So that's one of the costs that you might need to recognize, but it doesn't have to become such an extreme cost if you're able to have some kind of conversation. Say, hey, Randy, we're good friends. I'm going to be long periods of time in between contact, but don't take it personally. And you would write back and say, hey, James, I get it. I am too. But if I only talk to you every 2 years, yeah. So that's a really, I think, a healthy way to approach the issue of what are some of the consequences of deliberately choosing these periods of imbalance that we've been talking about. You are going to see it having impacts on other areas of your life, but they don't need to be only destructive. If you involve your friends and family in helping you deal with it. And by the way, that can be one of the success factors as well. You find a buddy who's willing to do an Ironman training with you. Gosh, that makes it a hell of a lot easier than if you were to do it by yourself.
You actually might find out who's really a friend and who's not, because there's depending on what you're trying to do and what the balance you're losing, and if they're not understanding of the whole thing, then maybe, and they're not supportive, then maybe they're not the right people that you need to spend time on.
Yes, there's a natural sorting mechanism as people go through their lives, and it's partly a function of just who has similar interests and similar goals, right? The person who, and you see this one of the first ways you see it is single versus married, kids versus no kids, because they start to have very different interests. They talk about different things, and it's no reflection of you or them necessarily. It's just you're single friends and out doing different stuff that you are with a toddler at home, and that's okay. All right. So I know we have in some of our descriptions, Randy, made it seem like imbalance is hard, it's awkward, it causes problems. All of that is true. I want to make sure people understand there's a payoff, right? There's a payoff in the sense that because it is hard and awkward and difficult and causes problems, most people shy away from deliberately embracing imbalance. They do. It sucks. Exactly because of that, you have an opportunity to stand out and to shine and to achieve ambitious goals, like I said earlier, by virtue of accepting the imbalance and embracing the imbalance. I think the way to be able to do that repeatedly and successfully is to do it in times of your choosing to the extent possible, and then to make sure that it is not the only thing that you do. If you go off and 100% of the time you're imbalanced in a way like the law firm partners where I described, but yeah, and you're going to be divorced and have a heart attack and die at the desk, and people are going to say that was a interesting choice of a life. So decide for yourself. But then once you've decided, for me, I'll give you a concrete example. I tried never to spend more than a couple of weeks with an intense focus on one activity, both because it was hard to maintain and also for this concept of, okay, that's enough craziness over here. Now I'll spend some time over here on something else that's important to you. I got to take the kids to the pool again this weekend, or I'm not pulling my weight at home, or I got to pay attention to work again and I can't only focus on my sporting activities. That's something that'll differ for each person. In some, I found that switching from extreme to extreme provided its own form of balance over time and allowed for peak performance in a number of domains in a way that had seeking and trying to achieve balance more uniformly, I don't think would have permitted.
Fair enough. I didn't agree with the premise in the beginning, but I can see the advantages of it in the end.
But you also added some good points for people to take into account, which is always why these discussions are good, Randy, that it's hard for one person to think of everything. And so if you listeners have other thoughts, Randy and I are happy to hear them. Send us your comments. And if we agree, great. If we don't agree, we'll talk about it in a future show. But as always, thanks for listening.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.